When HOA President Margaret saw my baby's yellow blanket in the playground, she said it violated community standards. I thought she'd just write a fine. I never imagined she'd pour scalding hot coffee directly onto my 6-month-old daughter's face. She had no idea my husband was watching through hidden cameras. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My name is Jessica Chin, and I never thought that a simple morning walk with my 6-month-old daughter Lily would turn into the most terrifying day of my life. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in October, and I had just moved into Sunset Hills, an upscale gated community where my husband David worked as a security consultant. David was away on a business trip, helping install security systems for a government facility. I was home alone with Lily, trying to adjust to our new neighborhood and hoping to make some friends. The community seemed perfect: manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and a beautiful park where young mothers often gathered with their children. Lily was such a happy baby, always smiling and gurgling with joy. She had David's dark eyes and my button nose, and everyone who met her fell in love with her instantly. That morning she was wearing her favorite pink onesie with little butterflies on it, and I had bundled her up in a soft yellow blanket. I decided to take her for a walk around the community to get some fresh air and maybe meet some of the other mothers I had seen at the park. I carefully placed Lily in her stroller, making sure she was comfortable and secure. She looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes, and my heart melted with love for my little angel. As we walked through the tree-lined streets, I couldn't help but feel grateful for this new chapter in our lives. David's promotion had allowed us to move to this beautiful neighborhood, and I was excited about raising Lily in such a safe, peaceful environment. But I had no idea that danger was lurking in the most unexpected place. About halfway through our walk, I stopped at the community playground to let Lily enjoy the morning sunshine. I parked her stroller near a bench and sat down, gently rocking the stroller back and forth while she made happy baby sounds. That's when I first saw her, Margaret Thornfield, the HOA president. She was a woman in her early 60s with perfectly styled silver hair, expensive clothes, and an expression that seemed permanently set in disapproval. She was walking briskly through the park, carrying a large coffee cup and looking like she owned the entire world. At first, I thought she might come over to introduce herself or welcome me to the neighborhood. I had heard from the real estate agent that the HOA president was very involved in community activities and liked to meet new residents. But as Margaret got closer, I could see that her expression was not welcoming at all. She was looking at Lily's stroller with obvious irritation, and her pace quickened as she approached us. "Excuse me," Margaret said sharply, stopping directly in front of our bench. "Are you aware that this playground has specific usage hours?" I looked up at her in confusion. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" "The community guidelines clearly state that playground equipment is only available for use between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., Margaret said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's currently 8:45 a.m. I glanced at my watch and realized she was right about the time, but I was still confused. "Oh, I didn't realize. But we're not using any equipment. We're just sitting on this bench getting some fresh air. The entire playground area is off-limits during non-designated hours," Margaret said firmly. "This includes benches, walkways, and grass areas within the playground perimeter." I looked around at the empty playground, trying to understand why this was such a big deal. "I'm sorry, I didn't know about the time restrictions. We can move to a different area if that's better." But Margaret wasn't satisfied with my apology. She moved closer to the stroller, peering down at Lily with a frown. "And what is that?" she asked, pointing at my daughter. "This is my daughter, Lily," I said, feeling a protective instinct starting to kick in. "She's 6 months old." "I can see that," Margaret said dismissively. "What I'm asking about is the blanket situation." I looked down at Lily, who was peacefully sleeping in her stroller, covered by her soft yellow blanket. "I don't understand what you mean." "That blanket is not regulation," Margaret announced as if she were delivering a verdict in a courtroom. "Community guidelines specify that all fabric items in public areas must be in earth tones, browns, greens, or beiges. That yellow is completely inappropriate and disrupts the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're upset about my baby's blanket?" "I'm not upset," Margaret said coldly. "I'm enforcing community standards. Standards that exist to maintain property values and ensure that our neighborhood remains a desirable place to live." Lily stirred in her stroller and opened her eyes, looking up at me with that sweet, innocent expression that always made my heart skip a beat. She was such a good baby, and she didn't deserve to be the subject of this woman's ridiculous complaints. I could feel my patience starting to wear thin, but I reminded myself that this woman was the HOA president and I didn't want to cause problems in our new neighborhood. You're absolutely right and I apologize. We'll leave the playground area right now, and I'll make sure to read through all the guidelines when I get home. I started to get up from the bench, planning to move Lily's stroller to a different area, but Margaret stepped directly into my path. Not so fast, she said. There's still the matter of the violation fee. Violation fee? I repeated, not believing what I was hearing. Playground usage during restricted hours carries a fine of $50, Margaret said, pulling out a small notebook and pen from her purse. Inappropriate fabric displays in public areas carry an additional $25 fine. That brings your total to $75. I looked around the empty playground, then back at this woman who was demanding money because my baby was wearing a yellow blanket. This is ridiculous. We weren't bothering anyone and we didn't even know about these rules. Rules are rules, Margaret said firmly. And they apply to everyone regardless of age or circumstances. Lily began to fuss a little, probably sensing the tension in the air. I reached down to adjust her blanket and whisper soothing words to her, but Margaret's voice cut through my attempts to calm my daughter. Don't you dare touch that blanket, Margaret snapped. Adjusting non-compliant items while in violation constitutes tampering with evidence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Evidence? This is my baby's blanket, not evidence of a crime. Violations of community standards are taken very seriously here, Margaret said. And your attitude suggests that you have no intention of respecting our rules or our community. That's when Lily started to cry. It wasn't her usual fussy cry, it was the hungry cry that meant she needed to be fed soon. I knew I needed to get her home or find a quiet place where I could nurse her. My daughter needs to eat, I said, starting to push the stroller around Margaret. We really need to go. But Margaret moved to block my path again. You're not going anywhere until this violation is properly documented and the fine is paid. I don't have $75 with me, I said, which was true. I had only brought my phone and keys on what I thought would be a quick, peaceful walk. Then you'll need to provide identification so we can bill your account, Margaret said. All homeowners are required to maintain a credit balance with the HOA for exactly these types of situations. Lily's crying was getting louder and more desperate. She was definitely hungry, and I could tell she was starting to get overheated in the morning sun. I needed to get her out of this situation immediately. Please, I said, my voice starting to shake with frustration and worry. My baby needs to eat and she's getting upset. Can't we just handle this later? Margaret's expression didn't soften at all. Children are the responsibility of their parents. If you had followed community guidelines in the first place, your child wouldn't be in distress. That comment made my blood boil. She was actually blaming my baby for her own unreasonable behavior. But before I could respond, Margaret made a move that changed everything. Margaret was still holding her large coffee cup, and as she gestured emphatically while lecturing me about community standards, some of the hot liquid sloshed over the edge. At first, I thought it was just an accident, until I saw the look of deliberate malice in her eyes. Maybe this will teach you to take our rules more seriously, Margaret said, and then she deliberately tilted her coffee cup toward Lily's stroller. I watched in horror as the hot coffee poured out of the cup and splashed directly onto my baby daughter. The scalding liquid hit Lily's exposed skin on her arms and face, and her cries of hunger immediately turned into screams of pain. No! I screamed, lunging toward the stroller to protect my baby. What have you done? Lily was screaming in agony, her little face turning red from the burns and the trauma. I could see angry red marks already forming on her delicate skin where the coffee had hit her. My heart shattered as I realized that this woman had deliberately hurt my innocent baby. I quickly lifted Lily out of the stroller, trying to assess the damage while she screamed in my arms. The coffee had hit her left arm, part of her face, and had soaked through her blanket to burn her chest. Her skin was already starting to blister in some places. You monster! I shouted at Margaret. You deliberately burned my baby. But Margaret's response was even more shocking than her original attack. She stood there calmly, brushing imaginary lint off her expensive jacket, and shrugged. Accidents happen, she said with a cold smile. Perhaps next time you'll think twice before violating community standards. This wasn't an accident. I cried, holding my screaming daughter close to my chest. You did this on purpose. I'm sure that's what you'd like to believe, Margaret said dismissively. But I'm afraid it's your word against mine. And I've been a respected member of this community for 15 years. I was shaking with rage and fear, watching my baby suffer because of this evil woman's actions. Lily's cries were breaking my heart, and I knew I needed to get her medical attention immediately. "I'm calling 911, I said, fumbling for my phone with one hand while holding Lily with the other. "Go ahead," Margaret said with confidence. "But I think you'll find that the authorities take a dim view of parents who file false reports against respected community leaders." As I dialed 911, Margaret calmly walked away, leaving me alone with my injured baby. But what she didn't know was that our entire encounter had been witnessed and recorded. What Margaret Thornfield didn't realize was that the Sunset Hills community had recently upgraded their security system. David's company had installed state-of-the-art surveillance cameras throughout the neighborhood, including several hidden cameras in the playground area. But more importantly, she didn't know that David Chin wasn't just any security consultant. He was a former FBI agent who now worked for a private security firm that specialized in protecting government officials and their families. And when his company installed security systems, they didn't just put in ordinary cameras. They installed military-grade surveillance equipment that could capture everything in crystal-clear detail. As I held my screaming baby and waited for the ambulance to arrive, my phone rang. It was David, calling to check in on us like he did every morning when he was away on business. "Hey, sweetheart," his voice came through the phone, warm and loving. "How are my two favorite girls doing this morning?" "David," I sobbed into the phone. "Something terrible has happened. A woman, the HOA president, she poured hot coffee on Lily. She burned our baby on purpose." There was a moment of dead silence on the other end of the line, and when David spoke again, his voice was completely different. Gone was the warm, gentle tone of a loving husband and father. In its place was the cold, deadly voice of a federal agent who had just heard that someone had attacked his family. "What did you say?" he asked, each word carefully controlled. "The HOA president, Margaret something. She was angry about Lily's blanket being the wrong color, and then she deliberately poured hot coffee on her. David, she's burned. Our baby is burned, and this woman acted like it was Lily's fault. Where are you now?" David's voice was so calm it was terrifying. "Still at the playground. I called 911 and the ambulance is on the way. But David, this woman just walked away like nothing happened. She said it was my word against hers." "Jessica, listen to me very carefully," David said. "I want you to stay exactly where you are until the ambulance arrives. Don't move, don't touch anything, and don't let anyone convince you to leave that spot." "What? What's going on?" "Because, sweetheart, that playground is covered by 12 different surveillance cameras, all of which record in 4K resolution with audio. Whatever that woman did to our daughter, we have it all on video." Even through my panic and fear, I felt a surge of hope. "You mean there's proof?" "There's more than proof," David said grimly. "There's enough evidence to put that woman in prison for aggravated assault on a minor. I'm going to make some phone calls and then I'm coming home. Take care of Lily and don't worry about anything else. That woman has no idea what she just started." The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed closely by a police car and a fire truck. The paramedics immediately began treating Lily's burns while I gave my statement to the responding officer. Officer Rodriguez was a kind, professional woman who listened carefully to my account of what had happened. She took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions, treating the incident with the seriousness it deserved. "Mrs. Chin, I want you to know that we take assaults on children very seriously," Officer Rodriguez said. "We'll be conducting a full investigation into this incident." "The woman who did this said it was my word against hers," I told her. "She seems to think her position in the community will protect her." Officer Rodriguez exchanged a look with her partner. "Ma'am, position or no position, if someone deliberately harmed your child, they're going to face consequences." The paramedics had finished their initial treatment of Lily's burns and were preparing to transport her to the hospital. Her cries had settled into exhausted whimpers, and seeing her little bandaged arm broke my heart all over again. "We need to take her to the burn unit at Children's Hospital," the lead paramedic told me. "The burns aren't life-threatening, but they need specialized treatment to prevent infection and minimize scarring." As we were getting ready to leave for the hospital, a black SUV pulled up to the playground. I watched as a man in an expensive suit got out and walked purposefully toward our group. "Officer Rodriguez?" the man said, showing his badge. "I'm Detective Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department. I understand there's been an assault on a minor?" Officer Rodriguez nodded. "Yes, sir. A 6-month-old infant was deliberately burned with hot coffee by an adult woman." Detective Martinez's expression darkened. "Do we have the perpetrator in custody?" "Not yet, sir. The suspect left the scene before we arrived." "Well, that's about to change," Detective Martinez said grimly. "I just got off the phone with some very interested federal agents. Apparently, this case has attracted some high-level attention. The burn unit at Children's Hospital was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The doctors and nurses who specialized in treating injured children were incredibly skilled and compassionate, and they immediately made me feel like Lily was in the best possible hands. Dr. Sarah Williams, the attending physician, carefully examined Lily's burns and explained the treatment plan to me. The good news is that most of these are second-degree burns, which means they should heal without permanent scarring if we treat them properly, she said. The bad news is that she's going to be in pain for several days, and we'll need to keep her here for observation. Whatever she needs, I said, holding Lily's tiny uninjured hand. I just want her to be okay. She's going to be fine, Dr. Williams assured me. Burns are traumatic, but children are remarkably resilient. The most important thing now is preventing infection and managing her pain. As the medical team worked to clean and dress Lily's wounds, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Chin? This is Agent Sarah Connor with the FBI. I understand your daughter was assaulted this morning. Yes, I said, surprised to be hearing from the FBI. But how did you? Your husband David used to be one of our agents, Agent Connor explained. When he called to report that his infant daughter had been deliberately burned by a community official, it got our attention very quickly. I don't understand. Why would the FBI be involved in this? Because, Mrs. Chin, what happened to your daughter wasn't just assault, it was a federal crime. When someone in a position of authority uses that authority to harm a child, it falls under our jurisdiction. Agent Connor explained that the FBI had been quietly investigating HOA corruption and abuse for several years. Communities like Sunset Hills, where HOA boards wielded enormous power over residents' lives, had become breeding grounds for petty tyrants who used their positions to bully and intimidate their neighbors. We've been waiting for the right case to use as an example, Agent Connor said. What happened to your daughter this morning might be exactly what we've been looking for. While I stayed at the hospital with Lily, David was coordinating with law enforcement from his location. Even though he was hundreds of miles away, his connections and expertise were making things happen at lightning speed. The first thing he did was contact his company's tech team and have them pull all the surveillance footage from the playground area. Within an hour, they had isolated the cameras that had captured Margaret's attack on Lily and enhanced the video to show every detail in perfect clarity. The footage was devastating. It clearly showed Margaret deliberately pouring the hot coffee on my baby, and it captured her callous comment about accidents happen afterward. There was no way she could claim it was accidental. The video showed her tilting the cup with obvious intent. But David didn't stop there. He also had his team run a complete background check on Margaret Thornfield, and what they found was disturbing. Over the past 5 years, there had been dozens of complaints filed against her with the county and state authorities. She had been accused of harassment, intimidation, abuse of power, and even physical assault. The problem was that most of the complaints had been dismissed or ignored because Margaret had connections with local officials and because her victims were often too intimidated to follow through with their reports. But attacking a federal agent's baby daughter was a different matter entirely. Margaret Thornfield was arrested at her home that evening while she was hosting a dinner party for several prominent community members. The timing wasn't accidental. David had specifically requested that the arrest be as public and humiliating as possible. According to the police report, Margaret was shocked when Detective Martinez and 2 FBI agents showed up at her door with an arrest warrant. She had apparently convinced herself that her attack on Lily would be swept under the rug like all her previous actions. There must be some mistake, Margaret said as the handcuffs were placed on her wrists. I'm the HOA president. I was simply enforcing community standards. Ma'am, Detective Martinez replied, you're under arrest for aggravated assault on a minor, child abuse and federal civil rights violations. You have the right to remain silent. As Margaret was led away in handcuffs, her dinner guests watched in stunned silence. Several of them immediately called their lawyers, worried that they might be implicated in whatever investigation had led to her arrest. But the most satisfying part of the arrest, according to the police report, was Margaret's reaction when she learned about the surveillance footage. That's impossible, she said. There are no cameras in that playground. Actually, ma'am, Agent Connor informed her, there are 12 cameras in that area, all installed by your victim's husband's security company. We have your entire attack on that baby recorded in 4K resolution. Margaret's face went white as she realized the full implications of what she had done. News of Margaret's arrest spread through Sunset Hills like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in the community knew that their HOA president had been arrested for deliberately burning a baby with hot coffee. The reaction was swift and overwhelming. Residents who had been intimidated by Margaret for years suddenly found their voices and began sharing their own stories of her abuse and harassment. Linda Foster, who lived 3 streets over from us, was one of the first to come forward. She told police that Margaret had once threatened to have her children taken away by Child Protective Services because their bicycles were the wrong color. Tom and Maria Gonzalez reported that Margaret had fined them over $2,000 for having a non-regulation garden gnome in their front yard, then had their water shut off when they refused to pay. The Williams family revealed that Margaret had called the police on their teenage son multiple times, falsely claiming he was selling drugs, simply because she didn't like the music he played in his car. Story after story emerged of Margaret's years of tyrannical behavior, creating a picture of a woman who had used her position to terrorize an entire community. But what made her attack on Lily different was that this time, there was undeniable proof, and this time her victim's family had the resources and connections to fight back. Margaret Thornfield's trial became a media sensation. The case had everything: a powerful woman abusing her authority, an innocent baby victim, and clear video evidence of a shocking crime. The prosecution, led by federal prosecutor Amanda Harrison, methodically built their case. They played the surveillance footage of Margaret's attack on Lily, which left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Several jurors were visibly emotional as they watched a grown woman deliberately pour hot coffee on a helpless infant. But the video was just the beginning. Witness after witness took the stand to testify about Margaret's years of abuse and harassment. The community members who had been too frightened to speak out before now found their courage, knowing that Margaret could no longer retaliate against them. David testified about the impact of the attack on our family, describing how Lily had suffered not just physical burns but also psychological trauma that might affect her for years to come. "My daughter was 6 months old," David said from the witness stand. "She had never hurt anyone, never broken any rules, never done anything except exist as a happy, healthy baby. And this woman decided to burn her with hot coffee because she didn't like the color of her blanket." Margaret's defense team tried to portray her as a dedicated community leader who had made a tragic mistake. They claimed the coffee spill was accidental and that Margaret's years of service to the community should be taken into consideration. But the surveillance footage made their arguments impossible to believe. The video clearly showed Margaret's deliberate intent, and her own words, captured on audio, revealed her callous attitude toward hurting a baby. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Margaret Thornfield was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for civil rights violations and aggravated assault on a minor. She was also ordered to pay $500,000 in restitution to our family and was permanently banned from holding any position of authority in a homeowners association. Lily's physical recovery was remarkable. Dr. Williams had been right about children's resilience. Within a few months, her burns had healed completely, leaving only the faintest of scars that would likely fade entirely as she grew older. But the emotional impact on our family took longer to heal. I found myself becoming overprotective of Lily, reluctant to take her out in public or leave her with babysitters. I had nightmares about the attack for months, and I struggled with guilt over not being able to protect her from Margaret's violence. David arranged for us to see a family therapist who specialized in trauma recovery. Dr. Michael Torres helped us work through our feelings and develop healthy coping strategies for dealing with what had happened. "What you experienced was a profound violation of trust," Dr. Torres explained. "Margaret wasn't just a stranger who hurt your child. She was someone in a position of authority who was supposed to make your community safe. It's natural that this would shake your fundamental sense of security. Through therapy, I learned that my feelings of guilt and helplessness were normal reactions to trauma, and that it would take time to rebuild my confidence in my ability to protect my daughter." One of the most positive outcomes of Margaret's conviction was the transformation of Sunset Hills itself. With Margaret gone, the community was finally free to become the kind of neighborhood we had hoped to find when we moved there. The new HOA board, led by Linda Foster, focused on building community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. They organized family-friendly events, created a playground improvement fund, and established a conflict resolution process that emphasized dialogue over punishment. Many of the families who had been driven away by Margaret's harassment began moving back to the community. Children who had been afraid to play outside were suddenly everywhere, filling the streets with laughter and joy. Lily, now over a year old and taking her first wobbly steps, became something of a celebrity in the neighborhood. Everyone knew her story, and everyone wanted to make sure she felt safe and welcome in her own community. The Gonzalez family gave her a small garden gnome for her first birthday, the same type of gnome that Margaret had once fined them for having. Linda Foster knitted her a rainbow-colored blanket, deliberately choosing the brightest, most non-regulation colors she could find. These gestures meant more to me than people probably realized. They showed that our community had truly changed, that it had become a place where children were celebrated rather than criticized, where diversity was welcomed rather than punished. The changes that began with Lily's case had grown into a nationwide movement for HOA reform and child protection. The Lily Chin Act had been passed in 37 states, and similar federal legislation was making its way through Congress. Thousands of families had been helped by the resources and legal strategies that emerged from our fight for justice. Abusive HOA officials across the country had been removed from their positions, and many had faced criminal charges for their actions. David and I were invited to speak at conferences and legislative hearings about HOA reform and child protection. We shared our experience not because we wanted attention, but because we wanted to prevent other families from going through what we had endured. No child should ever be harmed because of an adult's arbitrary interpretation of community rules, I said during one congressional hearing. And no family should have to live in fear of petty tyrants who abuse their authority. Our advocacy work led to invitations to help draft new federal guidelines for HOA governance and to serve on advisory committees for child protection organizations. On the 5th anniversary of the attack, David and I announced the creation of the Lily Chin Foundation for Child Protection, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting children from abuse by authority figures. The foundation's mission was threefold: to provide legal assistance to families dealing with abuse from HOA officials, teachers, coaches, or other authority figures, to advocate for stronger laws protecting children's rights, and to educate communities about recognizing and preventing child abuse. 10 years after Margaret Thornfield poured hot coffee on my infant daughter, Lily was a confident, compassionate 10-year-old who knew her own story and understood the impact it had had on the world. She often accompanied David and me to speaking engagements, where she would share her perspective on growing up as the face of a movement for children's rights. "I don't really remember what happened to me when I was a baby," she would tell audiences. "But I know that something bad happened, and I know that my parents and a lot of other people worked really hard to make sure it wouldn't happen to other kids." Lily's maturity and wisdom never ceased to amaze me. She had grown up hearing about child protection and victims' rights, and she had developed a natural empathy for other children who had been hurt by adults. When she was 9, she asked if she could volunteer at a local children's shelter, helping to read to kids who had been removed from abusive homes. Watching her gentle interaction with these traumatized children, I could see that she had inherited the same protective instincts that had driven David and me to fight for justice. "I think I want to be a lawyer when I grow up," Lily announced one day. "Like the lawyers who helped our family. I want to help kids who get hurt by grown-ups." The idea of my daughter following in the footsteps of the legal team that had secured justice for our family filled me with pride and hope. The little girl who had been victimized by a power-hungry bully was growing up to be someone who would protect other vulnerable children. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, our community held a Lily Day celebration in the playground where it had all happened. It was a day of remembrance, but also of hope and healing. Children from all over the neighborhood would come to play, their laughter filling the air where Lily's cries had once echoed. Parents would share stories and resources, supporting each other in the ongoing work of keeping their children safe. As I write this, 20 years have passed since Margaret Thornfield poured hot coffee on my 6-month-old daughter. Lily is now a 20-year-old college student, studying law with a focus on children's rights. She is everything we hoped she would become: confident, compassionate, intelligent, and strong. The attack that was meant to harm her ultimately made her into someone who is dedicated to protecting other vulnerable children. The legal and social changes that began with our case have transformed the landscape of HOA governance and child protection. Abusive officials can no longer operate with impunity, and families have resources and support systems that didn't exist 20 years ago. The Lily Chin Foundation has helped thousands of families and has become a leading voice in the fight for children's rights. The playground where Lily was attacked has become a symbol of hope and resilience, visited by families from around the world who draw inspiration from our story. But perhaps the most important outcome is that Lily herself has grown up to be exactly who she was meant to be. The attack didn't define her or limit her. It simply became part of the story of a remarkable young woman who is determined to make the world a better place for children. David and I are still married, still living in Sunset Hills, and still working together to protect children from abuse. Our community has become everything we hoped it would be when we first moved here. A place where children can grow up safe, loved, and free from fear. Every morning when I look out my window at the playground where our nightmare began, I see children playing and laughing. I see parents chatting on benches, watching their kids with the kind of relaxed attention that comes from feeling truly safe. This is the world that Lily's pain helped create, a world where children are protected, where bullies are held accountable, and where one family's fight for justice can change everything for everyone. The little girl who was attacked for wearing a yellow blanket grew up to be a young woman who is changing the world. And that, in the end, is the most powerful justice of all.